All right, hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the Action on Food, Elevating the Voices of Women, Youth, and Indigenous Peoples. My name is Glyndis Virginia Luciano. I am an International and Strategic Relations Project Manager at EIT Food and also organizing member of the Action on Food Hub. So yesterday at our pavilion was a Frontline Communities Day, and we just wanted to continue to highlight the role that we have in food systems to be able to include marginalized communities. We want to start off by actually setting the perspective from an Indigenous youth. So we have Sydney Males Muenala to start us off. Over to you, Sydney.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. So I'm Sydney Males Muenala. I'm from Ecuador. The community that supports me is Quichua Otavalo nationality. I come from a place where I still have forests, mountains, hills, waterfall, and a native language, which is Quichua. I want to tell you briefly about the situation of the indigenous communities where I come from. My grandfather was dedicated to sowing and harvesting the land. My grandfather told me that we have 4 periods during the year to sow, harvest, let the land rest, and then cultivate it again. He told me about the meaning of caring for the land and how we have to talk to the land because it is what keeps us alive and where we were born, where we grew up, and where we will return when we die. All of the oracle knowledge is based on cycles, as well as our life. Many of the indigenous community lives off what the land produces, because it is what we have in our environment without causing damage to the land. Now, because of migration, forced displacement, pollution, illegal mining, and the lack of justice with the rights of indigenous people, our life changed its course. Indigenous people face alienation of their lands or restriction on their access to natural resources or to the territories they have traditionally occupied. The food that you eat, that we eat, is because our ancestors took care of the land. Now, it is your duty, since in this place, you are the ones who make the decision for us. It is your duty to guarantee us a dignified life and highlight the rights that we are taking away from us. We want our lands to be free of transnational companies. We want you to live our water, our land, and our knowledge in peace. We know the land cycle and how it works. Ask us about solutions to combat climate change now. We are here to solve the climate crisis with our ancestral knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney, and thank you for sharing a first-account experience. Now, I would like to hand it over to Harriet Klepper from ProVeg International Youth Board, who's going to give us some concrete examples of how we can do a better job at the inclusion of youth, particularly. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Harriet.
Thank you so much. In this context, we have wanted to highlight several examples of how to include marginalized groups like youth, like women, like indigenous peoples in the process of just transition. In this context, the first one is capacity building. This is a central issue and it needs to be specifically targeted towards specific marginalized groups. One way, for example, is to work with local communities to train individuals that then can act as multipliers. Once trained, they can then go into schools, to farms, and also to local authorities to raise awareness for best practices in sustainable agriculture and, for example, growing local crops. In this way, we're not only reaching today's stakeholders, but also the future ones by ensuring specific targets of outreach to marginalized groups are being reached. The second one that is also central is finance. Designing finance facilities directly targeted to women, to Indigenous peoples, to youth. By providing financial incentives and the financial means to do so, to shift towards sustainable agricultural practices, we can at the same time work on food system transition while at the same time empowering marginalized groups. One example in the context of microfinance has been that lending to women has empirically proved to be less risky, and by putting into place technical assistance at the same time, we could extend those programs to other marginalized groups, taking into consideration, of course, also intersectional challenges. The third one is putting an emphasis on marginalized groups in sustainable agriculture outreach campaigns. This means that we need to adapt the promotion of those practices in a way that is adapted to the local context. One example is to increase efforts to campaign, for example, for growing local vegetables, specifically at local events in rural areas of a particular country. At the end, what we are saying is that we just want a food system that puts people first.
Thank you so much, Harriet. Now, we're going to move over to the global space, right? So we've heard from a local perspective then how it can actually work from what efforts we can do to be able to support marginalized communities. But now we're going to hear more from a global youth perspective. And so I will be handing it over to Erika Lopez Lara, who is a member of the Yungo Food and Agriculture Working Group and also part of the Action on Food Hub youth co-host. Over to you, Erika.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am here representing Yungo, the Yungo Food and Agriculture Working Group. We are the official youth and children constituency of the UNFCCC. And over the past year, we have been ensuring that we are able to actively represent the voices of youth by conducting consultation processes at the national, regional, and global levels, which allowed us to put forward our global youth statement. Now, I will want to outline our key demands, specifically for this COP in the agriculture area. First, we want to make sure that voices of people in vulnerable situations, which of course includes youth, Indigenous people, women, farmers, that are at the forefront of the negotiation process, specifically in the Sharm el-Sheikh SSJW. Given the status of the negotiations, we want to ensure that case studies and initiatives of frontline communities are prioritized. As a second point, we want to emphasize that we cannot afford to derail, delay, or deny climate action. We do not want false solutions to be considered. We want real solutions. We want to hear about agroecology and regenerative agriculture. We want real action in food systems that centers youth, women, Indigenous peoples, and small-scale farmers. Lastly, it should go without saying that we want to ensure that we are included in the implementation process and in the decision-making process, as we know that this affects us currently and also the future generations. This is the time to take action on food.
Thank you so much, Erika. Now, we've already have these demands that are coming from the Yungo Food and Agriculture Working Group. And a lot of it was focused on decision-making processes and wanting to be included in the global space. We know it is very difficult oftentimes to hear from the voices of from these marginalized communities in the global areas. And so I will hand it over to Marie Kosker from Action Against Hunger, who will explain more about her experience in being able to facilitate access in the global space for marginalized communities. So Marie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So, yes, my intervention will be very practical, responding to the question, how do we elevate these frontline communities' voices in these global spaces? First, we need maybe to change the rules in the UNFCCC. We need to move beyond being able to hear from observers only in interventions at the beginning of negotiations, at the closing, and in various side events. We need to have meaningful participation. This would mean that we can actually negotiate text side by side with the negotiators. And this is not something completely crazy. It exists in some UN spaces. I'm going to mention the United Nations Committee on World Food Security, based in Rome, that has a specific way of engaging civil society and indigenous peoples by making them able to negotiate draft text as a delegation, just like any party here at the UNFCCC. So this is a very interesting space. And to be able to do that, the second aspect I wanted to bring up is that we need also to be able, as Civil Society Alliance, to organize, to auto-organize, to bring those most legitimate voices to the table. And to do this, we need funds. It's very time-consuming, and traveling to COP is very expensive. So we also need to be able to have the means to auto-organize and to have the civil society organizations actively reaching out to the more grassroots organizations and enabling them to access these spaces. Sometimes it means giving the mic to somebody else, which I'm not doing today. But we have very specific practices in bringing women from frontline communities to global spaces. And this is very practical. For example, enabling interpretation in every language to make sure that you can actively participate. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Marie. Thank you so much for highlighting our need to be more intentional in how we're creating these spaces, and also for raising the question as well of who are we creating these spaces for and who is in the room and our role in having to do better. Now, I know many of us here are already speaking on the road to COP30, and so even though COP29 has not ended, but we're already thinking about the next one. I'm going to invite Juliette Tranchon from ProVeg International and Policy Zone Lead of the Action on Food Hub to just highlight what we can expect in terms of the Action on Food Hub as we head towards COP30, particularly on the inclusion of marginalized communities. So over to you, Juliette.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my name is Juliette. I work for ProVeg International, but I'm also leading the policy zone of the Action on Food Hubs, as Glynis just mentioned. So this is actually my fourth COP. When I was in Glasgow, I couldn't really see much around food systems, but much more progress has been made, and the Action on Food Hub is actually the direct result of this progress and showcase collaborative spirits between the different stakeholders. So I'm really glad to be here today to represent the hub. And over the past months, I've worked with multiple stakeholders to create this dedicated policy zone, because it is crucial to bridge the gap between the negotiation space and the pavilions, a gap where a lot of stakeholders are often unheard, whether it is the civil society or the policymakers. So it's therefore, and I am actually already convinced that the hub is a great success in bringing together the community. And looking towards COP30, I believe it is important that we stay united along the way. But to truly make progress, we must continue highlighting the voices of marginalized groups, particularly youth, indigenous peoples, women, and women communities often excluded from decision making. So each of these groups will bring unique insights and perspectives that are essential to build resilient and fair food systems. Youth, for instance, are not only tomorrow's leaders, but they are also today's visionaries, pushing for sustainable practices and demanding climate action. Indigenous peoples bring generations of wisdom about the land, biodiversity, and sustainable practices that we urgently need to respect and integrate into food policy. Women who play essential roles in our food systems have insights that can lead to more inclusive and effective food systems. And everyone, especially those communities most affected by climate change and food insecurity, deserve a place at the table where solutions are being crafted. So to ensure these voices are remaining central, our Action on Food Hub needs the support of all of you. As much as we have achieved together, there is still much to be done. Sustaining and expanding this effort requires the active backing of our entire community, from supporting ongoing dialogues to reaching out to even more groups. And as we look to the year ahead, we need to elevate our commitment. We must work to include even more countries and perspectives in our Action on Food community, especially those from regions most vulnerable to the combined pressure of food, water, and energy challenges. These issues don't exist in isolation. Food systems are deeply connected to water and energy, and addressing them in a holistic way will allow us to build stronger and more resilient framework. So together, let's continue to build momentum as we approach COP30, strengthening our coalition and ensuring that no one is left out of this critical conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliette. All right, so we've heard of the need to be more intentional and having more inclusive spaces, and examples of that can be done, the need for targeted finance, the need to make sure that solutions are coming from the ground and not up bottom solutions, but the other way around, as well as the need to have more ambitious commitments from our own civil society organizations at the global level, but also obviously from parties. And so I'm really cautious of time, and I would like to just go down the line and in less than 30 seconds to round up your statement.
We need action on food, and it means mobilizing the community.
We need action on food, and that means working with people on the ground.
We need action on food that is inclusive.
We need action on food and ancestral knowledge of Indigenous people.
We need action on food that is intentional in bringing the communities mostly affected by hunger to the table.
Clearly I was ready to go, but this is the time for questions. Please, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. Thank you for your really, really powerful words. I really appreciate it. My question largely focuses on reforming existing policy and not necessarily introducing new ones. So, for instance, I know that in the case of microloans, which I agree are super, super powerful and amazing, interest rates, particularly across Southeast Asia and in Latin America, are extremely, extremely high, trapping women in cycles of debt. So how do we start reforming existing policy when governments for extremely long periods of time have refused to enforce regulation?
All right. I believe, Marie, would you like to maybe tackle this one on how can existing policies, within existing policies, we can potentially do some kind of reforms?
My answer will be around the asks that we are bringing in the finance conversation, also here at COP. It's that any new finance needs to be grants-based and needs to avoid worsening debt situation in any country that is really affected by climate impacts and also food insecurity. So I would say it starts with this, at this global policy level, to actually give the right quality of finance that is needed to transform food systems, and this would be grants instead of loans or grants equivalent finance.
Thank you for your question. Would there be another one, potentially? If there are no other, thank you for your time, and come visit us at the Action on Food Hub, B21. Thank you.
You speak English?
Yes, I do.
After this over, I need 5 minutes. Is that okay?
That's okay.